On October 14, 2012, at 1:12 a.m., Wallace, Idaho, was quiet enough to hear a truck shift gears on the highway. In a small house just off Bank Street, 3 people were already dead or dying. 24-year-old Rachel Moore, her father Thomas, and her mother Linda would all be found later that morning. What happened to Rachel Moore inside that house, and why did no one come in time? For more than 10 years, investigators would dig through phone logs, DNA, and bad leads. One trace on a bedroom door finally spoke. The town thought it knew its own people. This case proved it wrong. By 8:47 a.m., a neighbor walking her dog noticed the Moore family's front door standing half open. Their truck was in the driveway. The lights in the kitchen were still on. She called the non-emergency line first, then 911 when no one answered the phone inside. 2 patrol officers arrived just after 9:10 a.m. They crossed a threshold that would haunt them for the rest of their careers. What they saw is still described in internal reports as one of the worst scenes in Shoshone County. There were no signs of a burglary gone wrong. The television was off. Wallets and purses lay where they belonged. Whatever had happened here was personal, sustained, and violent. Within an hour, the street was sealed. Crime scene tapes stretched from porch to porch, and curious neighbors were pushed back behind patrol cars. Wallace is a mining town of about 3,000 people. For generations, families like the Moores kept their doors unlocked and their car keys hanging on hooks by the back door. People knew who drove which truck, who worked which shift, and who stopped for coffee each morning at the same diner. Now they watched state crime scene vans roll in and reporters set up cameras at the end of the block. Inside the perimeter, investigators tried to build a timeline from the emptiness. Outside it, one person who loved Rachel watched the story break from hundreds of miles away. He could not reach a single member of his family. Rachel Moore was 24 and still living at home, but not because she had to. Friends said she liked the routine in Wallace and the safety of knowing her parents were in the next room. She worked mornings at a coffee shop off Cedar Street and logged into online nursing classes most nights. Co-workers described her as the person customers remembered, the one who remembered complicated orders and small details about people's lives. A few said she had a habit of turning rude comments into jokes that made everyone else relax. Thomas Moore was in his early 50s. He had worked in the mines when he was younger, then moved into maintenance work for a local equipment company after an injury. He was known for fixing neighbors' furnaces and snowblowers without charging them. Linda, around the same age, split her time between a part-time job at the Wallace Public Library and volunteering at community events. She was the one who organized bake sales, school supply drives, and holiday decorations on Main Street. Rachel had an older brother, Daniel, who had moved to Spokane, Washington, for work. The siblings called each other almost every week. Text messages from the months before the murders show them trading photos of family pets, half-finished home repairs, and screenshots of airline prices. He had promised to come down in November to let Rachel practice highway driving in his car. She had told friends she wanted to save enough to move out on her own within a year, but not too far. At the coffee shop, there was one detail staff mentioned later that stood out. Over the summer, a male customer had started staying later than usual, lingering at her corner of the counter, always choosing her line even when other baristas were free. Rachel brushed it off and did not want to file a formal complaint, but she told a co-worker she sometimes saw the same truck parked near her street on nights she came home late. If you follow real investigations like this one and want to see how each thread plays out, you may want to stay with us through the end of this case. At the time, no one in the Moore family saw those small details as the beginning of a pattern. By late morning on October 14, 2012, Wallace knew something was wrong at the Moore house, but not why. Patrol officers radioed in what they had seen and quickly pulled back. At 10:02 a.m., Shoshone County deputies arrived, followed by state crime scene technicians from Kerr. The address on Bank Street was blocked off. Yellow tape went up. Reporters from the local paper were already calling dispatch for confirmation. Officially, there was none. At 11:30 a.m., the sheriff's office released a brief statement. 3 people were dead inside a single-family home. Next of kin had been notified. There was no immediate threat to the public. That was all. No names, no ages, no cause of death. Within hours, residents filled in the blanks on their own. Someone posted that they had heard gunshots. Someone else insisted it was a gas leak. None of that was true, but it spread fast. By that evening, a sidewalk memorial started near the mailbox. Neighbors left candles, flowers, and notes addressed to Tom and Linda. That simple detail confirmed to the town who the victims were before any press conference did. At the same time, a Facebook group titled Justice for the Moore Family appeared. Most comments were sympathetic. A few were not. Anonymous accounts posted distorted photos of Rachel taken from her social media, added captions blaming her for inviting trouble, and claimed the house had been a drug den. There was no evidence for any of it. Inside the command post, detectives were moving in a different direction. They had a narrow window to preserve trace evidence before the scene degraded. Every door frame, light switch, and railing was swapped. Technicians marked reddish stains that appeared to lead away from the house, onto the sidewalk, and then disappeared at the street. The pattern suggested someone had left on foot, injured, before getting into a vehicle. By the second day, state police confirmed privately that this was not a murder-suicide and not an accident. They were dealing with a targeted triple homicide. That information did not reach the public yet, but one detail from the early lab work would soon force their hand. Before any lab report landed on a detective's desk, investigators did what they always do in a triple homicide. They started close to the victims and worked their way out. On October 15, 2012, the day after the bodies were found, two teams split responsibilities. One stayed on Bank Street, reconstructing the last 24 hours inside the Moore house. The other moved through Wallace with clipboards and interview forms. Detectives first ruled out the simplest explanations. There was no forced entry on the front or back doors. A sliding window off the small bathroom showed signs of being opened from the outside, but the latch was still working. Nothing obvious was missing from the house. Thomas's wallet, Linda's purse, and Rachel's laptop were all recovered and logged as evidence. Bank records obtained under emergency request showed no large withdrawals, no payday loans, no sudden credit card activity. This did not look like a robbery gone wrong or a desperate financial act. There were no domestic violence reports tied to the address. Wallace police had only one call to the Moore home in the previous year, and it was for a noise complaint during a birthday gathering. Thomas had apologized to the officer at the door and turned the music down. The officer noted no signs of intoxication, no arguments, nothing unusual. Rachel's recent relationships were checked next. Her current boyfriend lived in Kellogg, about 20 miles away, and security footage from a gas station there showed him on camera during the key hours. His phone records backed up his alibi. An ex-boyfriend from high school was now living out of state and had not been in Idaho for months. Co-workers at the coffee shop provided names of regular customers who paid extra attention to Rachel. Detectives flagged 3 of those names for follow-up interviews. One belonged to the man who had started waiting for her specific shift over the summer. By the end of that week, a whiteboard in the temporary command post listed every known friend, co-worker, and relative of the Moore family. Some names already had heavy lines through them. One name did not, and it was about to be underlined. In any homicide, the timeline either supports or destroys a theory. In the Moore case, the hours before the killings quickly stood out. Phone records, security cameras, and witness interviews painted a narrow window where something went very wrong inside the house on Bank Street. On the evening of October 13, 2012, Rachel left her shift at the coffee shop at 7:06 p.m. Camera footage from a nearby convenience store showed her buying cold medicine at 7:19 p.m. She told the clerk she was feeling sick and planned to stay in. A text sent to a co-worker at 7:42 p.m. said she was going to watch a movie with her parents and try to sleep early. Shortly after 10:30 p.m., a neighbor across the street noticed the Moore living room lights still on. That was normal. What was less normal was a dark SUV she did not recognize parked 2 houses down. Engine off, no one getting out. She mentioned it to her husband, then forgot about it. That detail only seemed important later. Investigators used cell tower data to estimate when phones inside the Moore home stopped moving. Activity on Linda's phone ended around 12:11 a.m. Thomas's phone showed no use after 11:52 p.m. Rachel's phone, however, remained active longer. At 1:03 a.m., a friend in Kellogg texted her to check in about her cold. At 1:26 a.m., a reply was sent from Rachel's device. The message itself never arrived. The carrier later explained that the phone had no remaining data balance, so the content was lost, but the outgoing attempt was logged. By that time, Based on blood evidence and body temperature, Rachel was already dead. Around 1:35 a.m., the same neighbor who had seen the SUV heard a short, sharp cry from the direction of the Moore house, followed by a heavy thud. She did not call 911. She later told detectives she thought someone had dropped something or slammed a door. When investigators overlaid the phone records, the sound report, and the parked SUV, the pattern narrowed their focus to a window of less than 40 minutes. Someone alive after 1:30 a.m. held Rachel's phone. When crime scene specialists finally moved through the Moore house in full, they did it in slow, measured steps. Every room told part of the same story. Thomas Moore was found first, lying on his back near the kitchen island. Chairs were knocked over. A cabinet door hung broken on one hinge. A drawer that normally held knives was open and empty. His injuries showed multiple sharp force wounds, not a single strike, and there were defensive cuts on his hands and forearms. He had tried to fight. Linda was a few feet away in the narrow hallway that led toward the bedrooms. Blood patterns on the walls suggested she had been moving when she was attacked, trying to crawl or pull herself forward. Investigators later counted many separate impacts. It was more than enough to cause death. The number and placement of the wounds signaled anger and repetition, not a quick attempt to disable. Rachel's room held the clearest picture of how focused the offender had been on her. Her body was found on the floor beside the bed. There were signs she had been under the bed at some point during the attack and dragged out. Items from her nightstand were scattered, and one lamp lay broken on the carpet. The bedding was disturbed, and some clothing appeared to have been removed and put back on. Forensic nurses documented evidence consistent with a sexual assault. The details were kept out of public statements, but recorded in the file. Blood spatter analysis showed movement back and forth between the kitchen, hallway, and bedroom. It looked as though the attacker had shifted between victims over a period of time. On the linoleum near Thomas, investigators found streaks that looked like someone had started to wipe or mop, then stopped. A damp kitchen towel with diluted blood was collected and sent for testing. Near the bathroom window, powder used to develop shoe prints revealed a partial outsole pattern in dried blood. It was distinct from any shoe owned by the family. Swabs taken from a light switch, the inside of Rachel's door, and the towel by Thomas would later isolate an unknown profile. Whoever left that profile behind had spent enough time inside the Moore home to leave it on almost everything that mattered. Detectives started by sitting down with the people who had heard or seen anything that night. The neighbor who found the door open was interviewed first. She described hearing a short scream after 1:30 a.m., then a heavy impact, like furniture tipping over. She admitted she did not call 911. She had heard no argument, no breaking glass, nothing that sounded like a prolonged fight. At the time, she assumed someone had dropped something in the kitchen or slammed a door. Only when she saw the open front door in the morning did that sound come back in detail. Another neighbor, 2 houses down, reported something different. On the afternoon of October 13th, she saw an unfamiliar man standing near the Moore driveway while Rachel brought in groceries. He leaned on a dark SUV parked at the curb and did not appear to be talking to anyone else. When he noticed her watching, he looked away and checked his phone. She had not thought to mention it until an officer asked specifically about strange vehicles. At the coffee shop, co-workers told detectives more about the male customer who preferred Rachel's line. One barista remembered him by name, Evan. She could not recall his last name, but knew he worked at a small auto repair shop outside town. According to her, he started as a quiet regular, then began staying after closing time under the pretext of finishing his drink. Rachel had once joked that she felt like she was on a shift with a shadow. Phone records later showed several late-night calls and texts from an unknown number to Rachel's cell, clustered around the nights she closed the shop. Detectives also spoke at length with Daniel Moore. He had flown in from Spokane the same day the bodies were found. In recorded interviews, he described his last video call with Rachel the week before, when she mentioned a customer who didn't take hints. Daniel told police he had urged her to be direct or ask a manager to step in. When detectives asked whether she ever gave a name, he hesitated, then said he thought she had mentioned an Evan. On their own, those interviews were fragments, but one first name was starting to repeat in the notes. By the third week, one name on the whiteboard had more lines around it than any other, Evan Kerr. Detectives learned he was 23, had moved to the Wallace area at 14, and lived with his mother and stepfather outside town. He worked as an apprentice mechanic at a small garage off Highway 90. Co-workers described him as odd but nonviolent, someone who exaggerated stories about bar fights and military training that never checked out. When detectives first approached him at the shop, Evan did something that raised eyebrows. Before they asked a single question about the night of October 13th, he volunteered an alibi. He said he had been home alone watching movies, then fell asleep on the couch. He added that no one could confirm it and laughed nervously. One detective later wrote that it sounded rehearsed. Investigators noticed fresh, deep cuts on both of his palms and along his fingers. Evans said he had slipped with a wrench a few days earlier and cut himself on a piece of metal. The story did not match the shape of the wounds, which looked more like injuries from gripping a blade that slid. Photographs were taken. The cuts were documented and measured. Back at the station, detectives pulled more of his background. School records showed no suspensions for violence. He had no felony convictions, just a citation for driving without insurance. On social media, he posted about cars, video games, and vague complaints about being overlooked. In private messages recovered later, he repeatedly mentioned a woman who led him on and chose someone safe instead. When asked directly how well he knew Rachel, Evans said they were just friendly. He claimed he barely spoke to her outside the coffee shop. That answer conflicted with what co-workers had already told police about his lingering visits and late calls. It also contradicted Daniel's statement about the customer who would not take hints. Detectives did not challenge him immediately. They let him talk. At that point, they still did not have a confession, a weapon, or a clear motive they could prove. What they had was a nervous young man with damaged hands and a growing list of inconsistencies. Within days, the Idaho State Police Lab produced a clear male DNA profile from the Moore house. It came from a mixture of samples. Swabs from the inside of Rachel's bedroom door, the light switch, and the bloodied kitchen towel all showed the same unknown contributor. The profile did not match Thomas, Linda, or Rachel. It did not match Daniel. It did not match anyone in state or national offender databases. For detectives, that meant one thing. The person they were looking for had never been convicted of a serious crime. Investigators began quietly collecting reference samples from men in and around Wallace. Some volunteered when asked. Others were contacted through formal requests. Every co-worker at the coffee shop, every male relative, and every close neighbor of the Moores was eventually swabbed. The strategy was simple. If the killer was part of their community, his DNA was already in their notebooks. When they reached the garage off Highway 90, Evan Kerr signed the consent form without argument. He sat for a buccal swab and fingerprint impressions. Again, he brought up his alibi before anyone asked. Again, he mentioned cutting his hands on a tool. Detectives noted his answers, but kept their reactions neutral. The evidence would speak on its own. It did. 2 days later, the lab returned a hit. The unknown male profile from the door, the switch, and the towel matched the standard taken from Evan. His fingerprints also aligned with partial prints developed on the back of Rachel's door. That door was the likely starting point of the attack. The odds of a random match were effectively zero. Search warrants followed. In Evan's small bedroom, investigators found a USB drive with Rachel's initials on a keychain she was known to carry. She had complained to a co-worker weeks earlier about losing it. In his car, luminol testing revealed clean blood traces on the floor mat behind the driver's seat. Later analysis tied those traces to Thomas and Linda. Despite this, Evan appeared in public as a mourner. News footage from a candlelight vigil showed him near the front, head bowed, holding a handwritten note for Rachel. But Evan still insisted he was only a shocked bystander. On November 6, 2012, 3 weeks after the murders, detectives brought Evan Kerr back to the Wallace station, this time under arrest. He was advised of his rights and booked on 3 counts of first-degree murder, with an additional charge related to the sexual assault on Rachel Moore. Bond was denied. Prosecutors argued that the DNA, fingerprints, and physical evidence tied him too closely to the scene to risk his release. In the first brief court appearance, Evan kept his eyes down. His public defender entered a not guilty plea on all counts. The judge ordered a full discovery schedule and a mental health evaluation. Outside the courthouse, cameras captured both sides of a divided town. Some residents said they could not accept that a thin, awkward mechanic could overpower 3 adults alone. Others pointed to the evidence and said they had no doubt Detectives continued to build the case. They traced receipts showing Evan had bought bandages and antiseptic the morning after the killings. Search history from his home computer included late-night queries about cleaning blood from car seats and local news articles about the Moore investigation. In his jail cell, Evan began writing letters to his mother. In some, he hinted at guilt and talked about snapping. In others, he claimed he had only gone to the Moore house after someone else attacked the family. According to one letter later read in court, Evan said he had driven by, seen the front door open, and gone inside. He wrote that he found Thomas and Linda already dead and Rachel badly injured in her bedroom. He claimed he tried to help her, that she died while he held her, and that he panicked and ran without calling 911. He blamed an unnamed man in a dark jacket for the murders. None of that story matched the blood pattern, the phone data, or the shoe print at the bathroom window. Behind the scenes, prosecutors weighed whether to seek the maximum penalty allowed under Idaho law. They also discussed a possible plea, but only if Evan finally told the truth. As pretrial hearings moved into 2013, prosecutors had to decide whether to take his not guilty plea to a jury or challenge his story another way. In early 2014, as the trial date approached, something changed. Evan Kerr told his attorney he wanted to plead guilty. It was not a full confession in the way most people imagine. He still shifted details and minimized parts of the attack. But he accepted that the state had enough evidence to convict him on all 3 counts of murder. Prosecutors agreed to drop only one charge related to the sexual assault language, without changing how the facts would be described in court. He would avoid the possibility of the harshest available penalty, but nothing less than life was on the table. In a packed Shoshone County courtroom, the judge asked Evan a series of standard questions. Did he understand the charges? Did he know the maximum sentence? Was anyone forcing him? Each time, he answered yes or no in a quiet, flat voice. When asked to confirm in his own words what he had done, he paused. According to the transcript, he said he went to the Moore house angry and jealous, that he brought no weapon, and that things got out of control after an argument with Rachel. He admitted using knives from the kitchen. He admitted attacking Thomas and Linda when they tried to intervene. He admitted leaving the house without calling for help. Experts presented to the court said there was no clear evidence of a major mental illness that would explain the violence. A psychologist noted Evan's long history of fixation on perceived rejection and his belief that he was owed a relationship. It was not a legal defense. It was context. Then came the sentencing hearing. Nearly 30 relatives and friends of the Moore family submitted victim impact statements. Some were read aloud. Daniel spoke briefly, saying no punishment would restore his parents or his sister, but that he wanted the court to recognize the deliberate nature of the crime. After hours of arguments and statements, the judge imposed 3 consecutive life sentences with a minimum of 35 years before Evan could seek parole. For practical purposes, it meant he would likely die in prison. The legal case was now closed, but for Daniel, the real work of living with the outcome was just beginning. For most people in Wallace, the Moore murders became a date they measured time against. There was before October 2012 and after. The house on Bank Street did not stay empty forever. Within a few years, it was renovated and sold. Fresh paint covered the walls. The carpet was replaced. New furniture came in through the same front door officers had crossed that morning. Online, the case did not move on so easily. Articles and message boards repeated early rumors long after the trial. Some still claimed Rachel had been involved with drugs or risky behavior. None of that was supported by police reports or testimony. A regional crime reporter later went back through the court file. He traced one of the worst claims to an early blog post that admitted using unnamed sources and never corrected the story. The damage, for the Moore family, was permanent. A forensic psychologist who followed the case said what unsettled people most was not the violence itself. It was the idea that someone like Evan Kerr could pass for unremarkable for years. No serious mental illness. No long record of assault. Just small lies, small grievances, and a growing sense of entitlement focused on one woman who barely knew him. It challenged the belief that only obvious monsters commit extreme acts. Daniel Moore has spoken rarely in public. In one interview around the 10-year mark, he described each holiday as a set of missing chairs. He said he focused on remembering his parents and sister as they had lived, not as they were described in police diagrams. He kept some of their belongings, but refused to keep anything from the crime scene file. He read the autopsy reports once and never again. Wallace slowly returned to routines, but some habits changed. More people locked their doors. The coffee shop installed more cameras. Parents warned adult children about coworkers and customers who blurred boundaries. When Evan's parole eligibility date is mentioned, it is usually followed by the same question. What does justice look like when the person who destroyed a family was, for years, just another face in line at the counter?